for March 1st, 2023. And as is our tradition, let's stand up and please say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right. Before we begin, I want to take just a moment of indulgence. I just asked my colleagues if they would indulge me. We are all here. I'm sure we could list people in our lives that helped bring us to the point where we are sitting on this important role, bipartisan role, helping make sure the elections in Delaware County run smoothly. And there was someone in my life named John Nee, who was both a friend and an incredible supporter of me. And I have no doubt that I would not be sitting here today, but for his friendship and support. He gave a tremendous amount to the community of Delaware County. I think I know some of you in the room know him. And if you did, you would know that it's a great loss to our community, but he inspired so many of us in government service to help make Delaware County a better place. And so for those of you who did know him or didn't know him, I just want you all to know that there was a great man named John Nee, and he passed, and I'm a better person for his presence in my life. So with that, we will move to the approval of the minutes, which were circulated to the board. I have reviewed them. I have no changes. Does anybody have any changes? Then do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Mr. Director, would you please review the agenda with us?
Members of the Board of Elections, good morning. We have a guest vendor here today, No Inc., one of the nation's leading electronic poll book vendors. They're going to present their product, the touchpad system, the poll pad, that allows for the faster and easier and more accurate check-in of voters. We would still have, if we were to use this or some other vendor's product, paper poll books as a backup. But the vendor has another meeting schedule after this one. We will be describing our plans to conduct a pilot project at no cost to the county involving electronic poll books at a limited number of precincts at the May 16 primary election. Because the vendor has another meeting with our voter registration staff, they're also the same company is involved in the redesign of what used to be known as the Sure system and now is the Sure Vote. So one of their companies, one of their wings is Total Vote, and they're developing the new Sure Vote system. So they're going to be going down to our voter registration department, meeting with some of our people from the wharf and the bureau here in media and the warehouse as well, presenting on that. So in the and additionally, I want to allow for any public comments on this item. I think it's important. So I would ask that item 3, Roman numeral 6A3, the e-poll book project, be moved up ahead of public comment so that we can incorporate that as well as the meeting schedule and be respectful of their time.
I'm certainly amenable to that. And just to be clear, we're going to have the presentation, but any consideration of whether to run the pilot project will be made at a further meeting.
That would be appreciated.
No. Okay. Does anybody have any objections to doing that? I don't know that we need to formally amend them, the meeting minutes. Are there any other changes or any other review of it that you would like to go through, Mr. Allen?
No, not
Okay.
at this time.
Then I think that makes sense for everybody's efficiency and time. And obviously there are a lot of people who did come interested in learning about the e-poll book option. And so I think public comment afterwards makes sense. And with that, then we do have a guest who's going to present. I understand it's going to take about 45 minutes. We want to get it right. So I appreciate her presentation. And if anybody needs to move around to get closer to the screens as she does that, please feel free. But would you introduce yourself and start your presentation? All right. Thank you.
Okay, so for those of you guys in the room that don't know me, my name is Kristen Anstra. I'm the director of sales. Say that again. Kind of walk and talk with it. Okay. Maybe. Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. So for those of you who don't know me, I am Trisha Banstra. I'm the director of sales at No Inc. on the pole pad side of things. I also brought with me today two of my colleagues that work on the total vote system. So that's going to be your new Sure system that's coming out for voter registration. So Heather Villa is here. She is the client manager supervisor. And then I also have Bradley House with us. He is the director of software development, but he also works in-house in St. Louis on the pole pad side of things as well. So I just wanted to give you guys just a rundown of who we are and where we're at. So as Jim mentioned, we are the largest electronic poll book vendor in North America. Our poll pad itself has been in 28 of these states, but our software umbrella is in 36 states across the US. We have about 1,600 jurisdictions, and just with the addition of Kentucky in the last few weeks, we have 110 or over 110,000 poll pads deployed across the US. We cover about 42% of registered voters and about 53% of jurisdictions in the US. Down at the bottom, you can see there's a couple of little icons down there that talk about other things that we do. We are state certified in 12 states. We work with vote centers, early voting, same day registration. We have a ballot printing station, voter registration. So there's a lot of different things that we do. We have 2 jurisdictions here in the state that use our ENR product. But just know that if and when you guys ever get to that point where you are maybe implementing something like early voting or same day registration, we do it already. It's no additional cost to the county. It's just you simply call our team and say, hey, we had some legislation changes. We're going to start doing same day registration, and we're just going to toggle it on in the back end system and work with you guys to make sure that you have everything you need for what you guys are going to require for the state. These are a couple of larger jurisdictions that we work in across the US. We do have 3 statewide projects. So we work statewide in Rhode Island, Georgia, and in North Dakota. Back in 2019, we brought on both LA and New York City. And then just last year, we brought on Clark County and Cook County. And then I always like to throw up in the top left corner, St. Louis, Missouri. So that is where our poll pad is homegrown. So our founder and CEO is Scott Leindecker, and he used to be the election director in the city of St. Louis. And he was the one that kind of came up with the idea of poll pads. So when he was the election director, he had a couple of vendors come in. He liked maybe one thing about one thing about another, but there wasn't really a poll book out there that he thought, this is perfect for me. So funny story about that. His wife had actually given him an iPad for Christmas that year. And he was like, why did you give me this iPad? This is ridiculous. And so then he started to think, that was back when the slogan, there's an app for that, was out. And he thought, why can't I build an app for this? Like, I can build something that would be specific for me. And so that's what he did. He went out and he hired a developer, and that is how PollPad came about. The other thing I like to talk about with St. Louis is we have about 60% of our staff in St. Louis, Missouri, myself and Bradley included, but we also have staff in South Dakota because that is where formerly BPRO is located at. We also own a state voter registration system in New Jersey, so we do have developers there. And we have a couple other developers that live in the United States and other places, but every single one of our employees is US based. So we don't outsource any of our development. Everything is done in the United States. This is just some information on the state of Pennsylvania itself, or I should say the Commonwealth, my bad. We have 10 jurisdictions here that currently use the poll pad. So we have about 1,500 poll pads in the state. And then as we mentioned earlier, we are implementing the new voter registration system here. So there will be a seamless integration between the two when the time comes. So we're excited to implement that. And I would say probably the biggest jurisdiction that we have here that's utilizing our poll pads is Bucks County. And then we just brought on Erie and Fayette as of earlier this year. So we're really excited to keep growing our poll pad business in the state. So this is just a brief little overview of the poll pad. So we call this our anyline, anytime solution, meaning that any voter can come and check in on any one of your poll pads at a specific precinct. There's no more printing of the paper rosters, or you will be printing them for a backup, but you won't have to have those lines of A through D, E through G. Every single one of those voters in that precinct can check in on any one of these poll pads. So it makes the line process a lot smoother, and you can probably check in voters in about 30 to 45 seconds. So no more flipping through those big paper books anymore. What you're seeing on the screen is just an Apple iPad. So I think everyone's pretty familiar with them, whether or not you have an Apple phone, an Apple iPad, or some sort of tablet at home. It's basically just the same software. We build our application on the Swift platform. So if anyone's familiar with developing apps, our application is built on the most up-to-date platform that you can build an iOS application on, which is called Swift. Back in 2020, CISA, so that's the Cyber Security Infrastructure Security Agency, offered a free program for all electronic poll book vendors to submit their code. We are proud to say that we are the only electronic poll book vendor in the country that did this and took advantage of their free opportunity. What they did is they basically took our code, went through it line by line, gave us a few tweaks here and there, but passed us with flying colors. So security is definitely one of our top priorities. I think everyone kind of knows now, just with the climate that's going on in elections, security is extremely important. And so we work as hard as we can to make sure that we have the most secure product that's out there. I have on here founded by election officials for election officials. So as I mentioned earlier, our founder and CEO used to be an election director in the city of St. Louis, but we have about 12 former election directors on staff with us now. So those are people that, you know, used to be a Jim, that used to be a Scott, that came from election offices that were actually running elections. So we like to hire people that know what it's like to be in your shoes. And then we have about, I would say 60% now of our client services staff has come from election offices before, whether they worked in IT, whether they started out as poll workers and then did poll worker training or just helped out in the office. Those are the guys that you're going to be calling and troubleshooting your application with if you have something going wrong. So we know that if you're calling us on the Saturday before a Tuesday election, you're probably not calling to talk about your kid's soccer game. There's probably something we need to go over with the application and make sure that everything is good to go. And that is why we hire people that come from this industry, because they know what it's like to be in your shoes. These are our 2020 numbers from the presidential election. So we processed almost 21 million voters on our poll pad during the presidential election in 2020. 8.2 million of those were early voting check-ins. We did almost 200,000 same-day registrations, and we brought on almost 250 new jurisdictions. So some people in the room that are familiar with elections are probably scratching their head and saying, why would anyone implement a new product during the middle of a presidential year? Well, the reason being is because there was a lot more mail ballots that were going out in 2020 because of the COVID situation. And so there were jurisdictions out there that wanted a way to electronically keep track of those ballots and those voters when they were coming in to check in at the polls. So it was a lot of fun for us. We were all still working from home at the time. So I always tell people it was a lot of me sitting at my kitchen table doing WebEx demos and things like that. So it is fun to obviously be here in person now. Our new poll pad stand. As I mentioned earlier, we do all of our development in the United States. We also like to keep a lot of our hardware in the US as well. So this is something that is built in Nashville, Tennessee. What we did, I call this Scott's baby. So during COVID, this is what he worked on primarily because we took feedback from a lot of our jurisdictions and our poll workers out there and said, what do you want to see different? And they said, we want something that's easier for our poll workers to put together. So lo and behold, we built a product that they don't even have to worry about putting together in the morning. So all they have to do is take this out of the stand or out of the case and place it on the table. The hardest thing, you know, we kind of went through a demo earlier this week with this, is just making sure that printer's plugged in. So the receipt printer is optional, but I do really, really encourage it. We'll talk about it when we get to that portion of the demonstration. The other really cool thing about this stand is that the iPad stays plugged in all day long. So you don't have to worry about having extra cords all over the place, an additional outlet. That little green cord on the side stays plugged into the iPad, so you don't have to worry about it dying on you during the middle of election day. Our peer-to-peer communication. So this is how your poll pads are going to communicate with each other in a polling location. So this means that if John Smith comes in and checks in on poll pad 1, at the beginning of the day, he can't be sneaky and try to come and check in a little bit later in the afternoon on poll pad 3 in the same location, because once he checks in, there's an almost instantaneous communication down the line to let every single poll pad in that precinct know that John Smith has checked in. So this is a proprietary communication piece with our application, meaning that, you know, Bradley can't walk into a polling location with his smartphone and see it. He can't turn his Bluetooth on his phone. So you have to have the PollPad application on a device in order to be able to utilize this communication going back and forth. We utilize basically the same technology if anyone has an Apple Watch or you're connecting your phone to your car. Same technology that's used. There is no connectivity or internet that needs to take place in order for this communication to happen. I do want to talk just briefly about connectivity. So currently in Pennsylvania, connectivity is not allowed on election day. So there will be no internet connection at all on election day. Just know that if and when the state ever gets to that point, we do offer a Cradle Point and a cellular iPad for communication pieces. A couple other products that we offer. Again, this is something that we brought out in 2019 when New York implemented early voting for the first time. So they do what we call early voting vote centers. So we developed a product called PollPrint. So this is essentially our version of a ballot on demand system. This means that once a voter checks in, whatever ballot style is associated with that voter will then be sent to the server pad, and that server pad will automatically print a ballot out. So not something that you guys are using right now, but I do like to bring up just a couple other of the products that we offer. Some numbers from the PollPrint station. So obviously New York City being our biggest jurisdiction that uses this, they printed over 1 million ballots on this during early voting during the 2020 presidential election. And we are in 45 counties across 8 states. ePulse is our backend system. The really cool thing about ePulse is what you can actually utilize when you have connectivity within your state. But currently right now, since the state doesn't allow it, this is really going to be more the backend system that the office is going to be using to build the elections, to configure the iPads and things like that. So we're not really going to get into this demonstration today because we're really going to talk more about just what's forward facing with your poll workers. So without further ado, we're going to get started. So as I mentioned, this is going to be very poll worker based this morning when I'm doing my demonstration. So we're just going to check in a couple of voters so you guys can kind of see what it would look like for you as voters on election day, what your poll workers are going to be using on election day. But I like to throw this slide up here so that you guys can get an idea of what actually comes in this beautiful green case that you see here. It is green for a reason. Most of the time when you go into a warehouse somewhere, everything's typically gray or black. So we want to make sure that these things don't get lost in your warehouse. But what comes in one of these is obviously going to be your stand with your printer included, your printer cords, a screen cleaner, the green cord that plugs into the side, an extra roll of paper, and then 2 styluses because typically one gets legs on election day and likes to run off with one of your voters. So that is my short and sweet PowerPoint presentation, and then we will just go ahead and pop into checking in voters. I guess I'll open it up for questions probably afterwards. I need to move the microphone stand over here when would that be easier?
No, if they're,
You want to sit it there while you talk?
Yeah, that'd probably be easier. Yeah. All right, so this is going to be what your poll workers are looking at when they open up their iPads at the beginning of election day. So there's a couple things on this screen that I want to run through before we start checking in voters, and just to kind of, I know everyone's probably got questions in their head right now. What about this and what about that? So just to give you an idea of where we're going with the demonstration, we're going to talk about an absentee sent voter or a mail ballot sent, an absentee received, a voter that requires identification. So we'll kind of walk through a bunch of different voter scenarios, what happens if they're in the wrong location and things like that. So just kind of helping to kind of probably squash some of the questions that you might be thinking about right now. But let's talk about a couple things on the screen. So up in the top corner where there's looks like two little yellow guys are talking to each other, that's going to be that peer-to-peer communication. So that's going to let you know that your poll pads are communicating with other poll pads within a precinct. Next to that is the green printer. It's green, which means we're good to go. So we use a lot of green, yellow, red within our application. For those poll workers or voters that might be colorblind, we also have an exclamation mark there if something does happen to be an issue with the printer. Down below that, you've got your countywide records and your precinct records. So each one of these poll pads is going to house your entire countywide voters on here, but only those voters that can check in at this specific precinct or this specific polling location can check in on this one poll pad. So we just want to make sure at the beginning of the day that our check-ins are at 0. And then the other thing we want to double check is the polling location, because if it's at the wrong polling location, then those voters will be listed in the wrong location. So down at the bottom where it says county courthouse, that's going to be the name of our polling location today. If everything looks good, all your poll worker has to do is take their stylus and click on Get Started. This is going to bring us to our voter lookup screen. So this is going to be very similar to your paper rosters that you have now, where it's going to be last name followed by first name. So today, for demo purposes, we're going to pretend that Mr. George Washington has come in to vote. So when we come in and train your poll workers, we're going to train them on the rule of 3. So we're only going to search the voter's first 3 letters of their last and first name. So I'm going to do WAS for the last name. I'm going to click on first name and I'm going to do GEO. And then I'm going to click on search. What this does is it filters through your entire county and it pulls up those voters that only match that search criteria. So here you can see George Washington is up at the top. And then we also have Georgia, but she's shaded in gray and she is in the wrong location. So that's what it will look like if voters are in the wrong location. And we'll get to that point when we get to that part of the demonstration. But since we're looking for George Washington today, I'm just going to take my stylus and press anywhere in that white banner, and it's going to pull up what we call our voter confirmation page. So here, the poll worker has the ability to verify the voter's address, date of birth, whatever it is that you guys need to verify on the screen will be right here. We like to say this is kind of what brings the voter to life because it's really, really big on the screen. Again, keep in mind when you're flipping through those paper books, it's really, really small. So this just makes it easier for your poll workers to see what they're doing. If everything looks good, your poll worker just clicks on accept in the top right. And then this is going to be the portion that the voter sees. So you simply flip this over for the voter to sign. So George can sign on the screen. It then gets flipped back to the poll worker. They click on done signing. Here, it's going to give me my signature on file versus the signature on election day. Again, if everything looks good, I'm going to click on accept. Looks great, doesn't it? It's hard to sign George's name upside down, so apologies. And then this brings us to our final page where your poll worker is going to initial. So one thing I want to point out on this screen, I don't know if anyone in this room has ever been a poll worker before or trained poll workers, but one thing on here is if I try to click on submit right now, it's not going to let me move forward. Reason being is because I haven't finished everything that needs to be done on this screen. So I'm not saying that the poll workers in Delaware County are like some of the other ones that we see across the US, that sometimes they forget to initial the paper roster. So we have some built-in fail-safes within our application to make sure that everything that needs to get done for a voter is completed. So all your poll worker has to do is initial, and then now you can see that submit button turns a dark blue, and I can press it. Oh, there goes my application. Great. Just kidding. Let's go back through here. Search, accept, flip. Love it when that happens. Accept, submit. And now this is going to print out a receipt that's going to have the ballot style down at the bottom. So the biggest thing with these receipt printers that you'll see, so like I mentioned earlier, they're completely optional. But the really cool thing about this is that everything that's on here is completely customizable. So you can put as much text on here as you want or as little text on here as you want. But the biggest thing that people really like about these is the ballot style down at the bottom. So we call this kind of a ticket for the ride. So we're going to give this to George Washington now as the voter, and then he's going to take it over to a ballot table. So then that poll worker that's working the ballot table can take this and say he needs ballot style 0001. They can reach behind them or whatever you want to do at your polling location and hand them the correct ballot. So that's really the cool thing with the receipt printers. The other thing that we talked about when we were in Dauphin County earlier this week, so the way that Jerry utilizes this in some of those locations where he's consolidating precincts, is he obviously likes to have that ballot style down at the bottom, but then he also hands this to the person who's handling the numbered list of voters. So apparently it's a really big thing here for spelling errors on the numbered list of voters. So this has got that name spelled out correctly right here. So there shouldn't be any confusion on how to spell that name. And this just gives you an extra piece of validation. People like paper these days. It's another piece of an audit log. This is not something that the voter takes home with them. This is something that you guys keep as Delaware County. And most of the time people just put it in an envelope and keep it for 5 years, I think is what the law is here. So that's how that works for a perfect voter. So like I mentioned, we're going to walk through a couple of different voter scenarios. So our next voter that's going to come in is going to be Mr. John Adams. So again, we're going to do the rule of threes. I'm going to do ADA, ADA, first name J-O-H, and click on search. Again, this is going to filter through my entire countywide records and pull up those voters that match the search criteria. So here, John Adams is shaded in a red, and he is listed as an absentee sent voter. So we have sent him a mail ballot, but we have not received it back in our office. When I click on his information, this is going to give me a prompt. So we really, really love these at No Ink. Reason being is because it's basically like having a manual right in front of the poll worker. And this tells the poll worker exactly what they need to do for a voter whose mail ballot has been sent to them. So all of the text in here that's underneath John Adams's name can be customized and configured to what you guys want to do here in Delaware County. This simply reads that this voter has been issued an absentee or mail ballot. Voters who requested these ballots are not eligible to vote unless they surrender their absentee or mail ballot and declaration envelope to the judge of election. You can have as much information in here as you want to, or as little information in here as you want to. If you wanted to put the office phone number in here, you could. But for demo purposes today, we're going to pretend that John Adams did exactly what he was supposed to do. He brought in his ballot and his envelope, and now we can click on ballot and envelope surrendered. Now we have the ability to go ahead and map John Adams through the process. You're still going to be taking that manual process of what you're doing with your mail ballots and your envelopes at this time. So everything that needs to get done with that is still going to be happening. But now we can go ahead and check John Adams in. So again, I'm going to click on accept. This is where we flip it around for John Adams to sign. It gets flipped back to the poll worker. Again, I've got my signature on file versus the one on election day. This screen is also optional, so you don't have to have the big signatures on there either. I know some jurisdictions here in the state like it because it brings it to life. Other people don't, because I think technically the law states that you're not supposed to be like comparing signatures like that. So you can have the big screen in here. If you choose not to have it, it'll just look like this. So you'll still have the signature on election day versus the one on file. And then your poll worker can simply initial and click on submit. So again, same process as we saw before. This is going to print out a receipt. And actually, I'm going to pass this around so you guys can see it there. Okay, our next voter today is going to be an absentee received voter. So it's going to be Mr. Millard Fillmore. If you guys can't see, we have a little bit of a trend here with our dead presidents. So I'm going to do F-I-L, first name M-I-L, and click on search. And here we can see that Millard Fillmore is an absentee received voter. So we have received his ballot in our office. So I'm going to again click on his information. And this is going to pull up another one of those prompts, but this is a little bit different than the last one because we have received his ballot in our office. So this just says that this voter's absentee mail-in ballot has been received by the Board of Elections. They may not vote in today's election, and if they insist on voting, they must be processed provisionally. So at this point, you can click go back if Millard's like, you're right, I forgot, I sent that in, or my wife sent it in. Fine, I'm going to leave. Or you could run into the situation where he's stomping his feet and he's swearing up and down that he never received a mail ballot and he sure didn't mail it back in. So all your poll worker has to do now is say, no problem, we're just going to give you a provisional ballot. We'll worry about it on the back end. So I can click on process provisionally. And now you can see up at the top, Millard Fillmore has that red banner across his name and it says provisional. I can again run through this situation. I'm going to click on accept. I think here in Pennsylvania, I know we talked about this in Dauphin County the other day, provisionals actually don't sign the poll book. So if you wanted your provisionals to sign on here, you could. If not, we can take this signature screen completely out. But Millard can sign. And then we're going to obviously, again, same thing we've seen. I'm going to initial, click on submit. So there's just a little bit of a difference here when we talk about a provisional voter, because when you're talking about having a ballot table and things like that and giving Millard a ticket for the ride, now up at the top of this ticket, it has in big bold letters, provisional. So that lets your poll workers know that this voter is to receive a provisional ballot. So you can make that provisional as big as you want to or as small as you want to. You can put it down at the bottom next to the ballot style, however Jim wants to handle the situation. The other thing I like to point out is let's keep in mind that we processed 3 voters now on our poll pad, right? So we've done George Washington, John Adams, and Millard Fillmore, but our check-ins are still at 2. Reason being is because we don't want those provisionals to be calculated in with what's going on at the tabulation machines. So that's why you're not going to see that, but I'll talk about the summary report at the end of the demonstration where you guys can get access to all of the provisional voters that have checked in. So that's why that is how it is. Our next voter is going to be Mr. Martin Van Buren, and he's going to be an ID required voter. So he's voting for the first time today. So I'm going to do VAN, first name MAR, click on search. So again, this is what it looks like when multiple voters pop up. We're looking for Martin Van Buren. He's up at the top. We do have 3 other voters that matches criteria, and they're shaded in gray at the bottom. I'm going to click on Martin's name. And it's going to tell me right here that he is voting for the first time, and we're going to need to confirm his identification. So this just reads the voter must show an ID. And then down at the bottom, like I mentioned earlier, you can put the office phone number in here. And then if the ID has been confirmed, we can select ID confirmed. If it was unable to be confirmed, then that will process in provisionally, or we have the option to just go back. So again, for demo purposes, we're just going to click on ID confirmed, and now we have the ability to go ahead and check Martin Van Buren in. Done signing. Signature on file. Looks close enough to me. Again, we're going to initial. The other thing I want to talk about on this screen is if this voter is coming in for the first time and requires assistance, we have that assistance required box that's down there at the bottom. If I click on this, it's just going to give me a pop-up here where I can capture the assister's name, their information, if I need their address, if I need their phone number. If you guys have an oath for your assisters, you can put that right here on the screen and they can sign on it. You can have a drop down in here that you guys can customize to whatever reason that this voter might need to be requiring assistance. And then we can capture all that information right here on the screen. And I'm going to go ahead and click on submit. And again, same ticket that's printed out before. And we get the check that Martin has been checked in. So I'm sure a couple of you are sitting here thinking like, well, we have a lot of voters in Delaware County, and I'm sure our search criteria is going to pull up way more than just 2 to 4 voters when someone checks in. So I want to talk about different ways where you can look voters up than just looking for their last and first name. So our next voter is going to be our good buddy, Abe Lincoln. Abe's coming in. We've known Abe for a really long time. So we're going to look him up. I'm going to do LIN, first name ABE, click on search. And it's going to tell me that there's no voters found. Can anyone tell me why there's no voters found when I'm looking for Abe? Yes. So we're spelling his name wrong. This could be the same situation with a William and a Bill. So these are your neighbors, right? You're looking for their last name typically in that paper roster, but this is what it looks like if you search their name and no one pops up. So the other ways that you can look voters up, and I'm just going to exit out of my search criteria, is I'm going to click on advanced options over on the right-hand side. And this is going to give me a drop down of all of the other ways that I can look a voter up. So you have date of birth, address, license number, voter ID. You can take some of those away if you want to. You can leave as many of them on there as you want to, but most of the time, we're just looking up our voters by their date of birth. So if I click on date of birth, and I put Abe's birthday in there, which is 02/12/1909, and I click on search, this is going to search all of my voters in my county that have that birthday. Abe's the only one here, but again, we can also use the search criteria up at the top. If we know his last name is Lincoln, I can do LIN with his date of birth in there and click on search. So that can help filter out some other different situations where you might need to shrink down that search criteria from just searching their date of birth. And then last but not least, because I don't want to take up too much of your time, I want to talk about what happens if a voter is in the wrong location. So I'm going to clear out my search criteria and click on reset. And we're going to look for our good buddy Ace Adair. So he is not a dead president. He's my only example today that isn't one. So I'm going to do ADA, first name ACE, and click on search. And again, he's going to be shaded in gray, and it says wrong location over there on the right-hand side. So what I do at this point is I click on his information, and this is going to pull up another one of those prompts. This just simply reads that he is in the wrong location. You know, Ace might say, he might swear up and down, he's voted in this location for the last 15 years and he's not going anywhere else. So you can at this point give him a provisional ballot, but for demo purposes today, we'll pretend that Ace is like, I just saw a vote here sign and I wanted to come in. I wasn't quite sure where I needed to go. I'm on my lunch break. Can you tell me where I need to go? And I can click on display map. So what this is going to do at this point is it's going to give me a couple different options on the right-hand side. Now, this is a little bit of a tease for those of you guys that are here because without that connectivity piece, you're not going to have the map and the actual driving directions on here. So I'm working right now with a cellular iPad, but with you guys in Pennsylvania, all of that's going to be turned off. So what you will get on this screen is the name of the polling location that Ace needs to go to, the address of the polling location that Ace needs to go to, and you will have the ability to print that address. So when I print it out, it's just going to print out the address, and then Ace can take this to where he needs to go. So I'm sure Ace probably's got an iPhone or GPS in his car, and he can now take this little slip of paper and run to his car and type it in, and it's going to tell him exactly where he needs to go. If the state ever does get to the point where you can use internet connection on election day, you will have a driving directions map. It looks like Ace is probably going to take a few days to get to St. Louis, Missouri at this point. And then the turn-by-turn directions will also be there on the screen. So that's basically just like your old MapQuest, so you can print that as well. Again, with the connectivity piece, you can text your voter. So if Ace was standing in front of us, I could say, what's your cell phone number? I'll go ahead and text it to you. And that address will automatically pop up on his phone. And then he can walk out and he can click on that address and it'll pull up whatever map that he uses on his phone to take him to the right location. So most of the time when we go in and we do demonstrations, especially for those people who are used to paper rosters and things like that, this is a really big deal because what the phone calls are that are coming into these guys' offices almost every single day is, where do I go vote? Hey, I've got this person, they're at the wrong location. What's their polling location? You might have a precinct finder book at that location, but it's all going to be right here on the poll pad at your poll worker's fingertips. So it's going to take away a lot of those phone calls that are coming into the office. And I'll pass this little flip around too, so you guys can see. Last but not least, I know we said I would show you guys where the provisional voters pop up. So that menu button in the top left, where there's three little lines there, if I click on that, this is going to bring me to just a circle menu of some of the other things that your poll workers can have access to. Like we mentioned earlier, summary report. If I click on that, that's going to show me everybody that's checked in today. So don't mind my canceled because I do use this for demonstration purposes a lot. But we had 3 check-ins today and 1 provisional voter. I can print this if I need to. So if Jim says, hey, I want every single polling location to print something like this out at the end of the night because I want it stapled to all of your tabulation information, you guys can do that. It will print the number of check-ins and provisionals that you had and just simply give you a summary report here. If I click on check-ins at the top, it's going to show me everybody I checked in with a timestamp. So this is also going to be comparable to your numbered list of voters that you have. So you can compare those two when you're still manually doing it, but you'll also have it here on the iPad. Down at the bottom, this is automatically going to be configured to your polling location or your precinct. So when you go to summary report, it's going to automatically, well, it should match up with your tabulation machine. But down at the bottom, if I click on configure, if I just want to know exactly what happened on this poll pad and not all of the ones in my location, I click on this and I can configure it to this unit or my location. You can actually print out the list of voters that are on here too. So you guys are lucky enough where you don't have to do this, but in the state of Ohio, they have to print this out every 3 hours and tape it on the door. So you can think of the long, long list of voters that are printed out, but that's why we have the ability to do these things. And then if you click on provisional, we can see our provisional voter that we checked in here. One more thing in the menu that I think is really cool that your poll workers I think will really appreciate is that training materials down there at the bottom. This gives your poll workers access to other things that could come up on election day. So if Jim says, hey, I want to have our tabulation equipment video on how to set it up in here, he can put that in here. So it's not limited to just PollPad, and it's not limited to just No Ink. You can put whatever you want in here. So for instance, I've got the Delaware Election Day Guide in here. This is an 86-page guide. So if you wanted to put something in one of those prompts that references a page in the manual, they can go here and look it up. I've got my newsstand set up in here. So like I said, you can put videos, you can have PDFs in here, and it doesn't have to be PollPad or No Ink specific. So that's kind of my brief rendition of the check-in process. So
That's great. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
What we'll do is just make mindful of everybody's time. Why don't we start with my colleagues, and if we have any questions? I have a couple, but I'll defer to them first, and then we'll move to the audience and just try to remind yourself, for those of you that we do normally have a time frame, but we'll just try to keep this not too much of a give and take so that you get stuck around the stand.
yeah, that makes sense.
So, if it ever came to the point in Pennsylvania where they had voter ID, is this set up so that, excuse me, it can either read it or, I mean, how would that work? Is it capable of that?
Yeah, so actually in most states, we have where you can either scan the back of the driver's license or look them up by manual entry. So if someone brings in like a passport or something where it is voter ID required, you can still look them up manual entry, but most of the time people are scanning the back of the driver's license. So we have the ability to do that. And then with the Sure system that's coming out, you can also print out like a voter notification card that has a barcode on it that's also associated with the voter. And you can use that and scan it, and it will automatically pull the voter up. So it takes away that whole search process of the last or first 3 letters of the last and first name.
If I may, I love that question because there are states that use this poll book and other poll books where they do not require ID, but they enable the ability to scan the ID, which speeds up check-in. And so it's not required, even where it's not required, they enable this technology so that it just pulls up the voter's name and address immediately. And it reduces the possibility of, let's say there's a Mary Smith whose daughter lives at the same house, who's also Mary Smith. It reduces the prospect of the wrong voter being checked in, or if there are 2 Mary Smiths in that precinct, it reduces that as well. So right now, Pennsylvania, unfortunately, in my opinion, does not allow for enabling that technology. I wish they would allow for enabling that technology because it would speed up and add to the accuracy. There are very few times when you can put those 2 things together. And so that is something that we are going to try to push with the new secretary.
I know, like Jim mentioned, in New York specifically, New York City obviously uses our poll pad. And what they did is they took those voter ID barcodes from their voter registration system and put every single one of them on a keychain and mailed them out to their voters. So they're not ID required, but they have a little barcode on their keychain where they can scan it on the poll pad and it will automatically pull the voter up. And then I've got Onondaga, which is Syracuse. So Onondaga County, they call it a fast pass lane in their early voting location. So if someone does want to show their ID or does have their voter notification card with a barcode, they can go to the fast pass lane and it takes about 15 seconds to check in instead of about 30 to 45.
And Madam Chair, the only other question I had, just to confirm, your company does not make political contributions or does not have a political action committee, and you've not contributed anything in Pennsylvania or Delaware County.
Nope.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I couldn't help but notice the first voter you checked in, we had a little app crash or what happened there?
So I should have turned this into what we call guided access mode, where it can't actually get out of the application. Most of the time when we do send this out, we tell our jurisdictions to put it in what we call kiosk mode. So that way something like that can't happen. I took it out because normally the printer's plugged into the side and it's hardwired in there, but I had to Bluetooth it today to plug the HDMI cord in. And so it popped out, but most of the time your app will, or your application is going to be in what we call guided access mode. So your poll workers and no one else can get out of the application on election day.
Got it. So you came out of it to get into that home screen versus.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
I have two questions. One is first about the receipt. I haven't said my feelings about the receipt.
Sure.
But the one thing that you mentioned was that could be an audit paper, like collected, maintained. And what scares me about that, frankly, is in the chaos of election day, having been a poll worker, and this lots of little pieces of paper that can flip up and fly away, and I don't think we have 100% of the perfect scrap paper collection. It just seems possible that a piece of paper could easily get lost, and then someone in this county has experienced an incredible amount of frivolous allegations about election fraud.
Yep.
Say, well, there's one little piece of paper missing. Suddenly now that whole precinct is a bastion of fraud.
Right.
What's your experience with that? How do you think about that?
So to be honest with you, most people don't typically use it to go back and search through it. This is more or less, I think, here in Pennsylvania for people to use it for the numbered list of voters. And then if something happens where like the voter drops it or something like that, we can go back in here and do a reprint. But most of the time, I'll give you an example of why I think that the receipt is very important. And this is a real life example of something that happened in another jurisdiction. So I'm just going to go back to my home screen and I'm going to check in a voter or look up a voter. We'll look up my boss. So LEI, first name SCO, and click on search. So I had a jurisdiction that didn't have the printers and they were going in here and looking up a voter, and then they click on his name and then they'd have the numbered list of voters right here in the middle, and they would put their name down and then they'd say, go back. So there's not that actual finishing of the check-in process. So it's almost like another checkpoint in the check-in process to know that you've actually processed the voter as you were supposed to. Now, with our audit system on the poll pad itself, we could go in and see at the time that that poll worker was working every single search and tap that was done on the iPad itself. So we compared that with the numbered list of voters to be able to give those voters credit for voter history and things like that. But that's where I really think that the receipt printer comes in. It's not more or less for, auditing purposes, although I think it makes people feel better. But most everything is done electronically when you're talking about auditing on the poll pad.
We would, whether it's this poll book or another poll book, the value in this is that you can have 4, let's say, poll books or 5 poll books at one check-in station at a polling place that may have 3 or 4 precincts. And you can hand the voter this ticket and then direct them to the right table. And so there's one place where all the voters queue up into one line, but then they spread out to the whichever poll book is open. And then you can direct them, you're going to go to table 4. in talking with other jurisdictions who are already using this technology, their poll workers, whether they're Republican or Democratic, are saying, if you ever try to take this device away from me, you're going to have to, I won't work again. Because it directs voters to the right precinct. You have none of this, and what I'll talk later about the pilot program, but you have none of this where people are going to this table, then being told, maybe you're over in that precinct, maybe you're over in this precinct, and it just adds to the congestion. You might only have, 25 people trying to check in, but if 10 of them are going to the wrong polling station, and nobody has the ability on the paper poll books right now to say, oh, John Jones, you belong at table 3. Whereas this allows that. So additionally, in the slips I handed out and the slips that you see in a primary, it marks very clearly their party affiliation. So they're making sure that they're giving a right in a primary, the right ballot. And lastly, it simplifies the whole process of someone using the paper poll book right now has to transfer that information to the numbered list of voters. And now instead they're transferring the clearly printed out information from this item to a numbered list, which is going to contribute to a much cleaner numbered list and less disruption at that check-in station.
And those are all the reasons why I'm mixed on the other side. I think that if we, let's say we do go with you as a vendor and we do adopt all of which has not yet been decided, but if we do all of that, I appreciate what you said about the audit really trail is really in the computer. It's not the piece of paper. I think we would have to have a clear practice for what to do with those pieces of paper, because some will go missing.
Yep.
And then someone will try to make hay out of it and they'll be wrong.
Correct.
And I just don't want to end up in this county. We have too much of that
Yep.
false accusation.
Yeah.
And claims. The second question I have for you is the poll worker signatures.
Mhm.
I have the worst handwriting in the world. I have lots of theories about why, but but I also think I sign much more. I was worser on the electronic, pads. Fair. And so, what's your experience with poll workers becoming many auditors in a level that they might not otherwise because of the fact that it's electronic versus a copy of a hard signature?
Right. So I will say when I went and demoed this for the first time in Lycoming County, if you guys know Forrest, he is very adamant about the laws here. And he said, our poll workers are not supposed to be signature, auditors. They're not supposed to be actually comparing them and saying that someone can't vote. Now, with that being said, that's where I think that larger screen, you could take that off and just have the final page with the signature on file versus the one on election day. And if there is confusion, all you have to do is say, hey, you might want to try that again. Let's just go back and can you just re-sign to make it maybe look a little bit differently? I mean, I kind of had this experience when I bought my condo 3 years ago and I went to the bank to get my check out and I signed and they're like, I'm like signing just, squiggles now. And I'm sure when I opened my bank account, I was using little hearts on the I and lowercase and whatever it was. And so with that being said, they were like, can you try differently? And so you can also go back as well. But the biggest thing right now is, 11 years ago when these came out, it was kind of a concern, but there weren't a lot of electronic signatures going on. But now we're going to the grocery store. I was at Wawa this morning getting a cherry Coke for someone over there, and I had to sign on the screen. And so everyone's kind of used to now signing electronically. And then I don't want to speak for the SURE system, but what you can also do with these is update signatures if the state allows it as well. So if someone signs on here, we do have jurisdictions in other states that will use the signature from election day and then use that as the next signature that they use on election day. So if everything comes back like it's supposed to, you can update signatures as you go along.
My preference would be to offer whatever we already offer in the paper poll books. So right now we have signature clips in the paper poll books. I think they do serve a value. And I think we would opt to have that in there. I think in this case, more is more.
I think then we're gonna have to train people. We would have to train very effectively for that because the presentation is going to be very different from the small
Correct.
presentation of full book that will be, because it's smashed, because of the
Right.
handwritten, it'll look a little bit different and maybe more, have less, potential abrasion.
Yeah. And I think too, like the biggest thing to think about here is we're not changing any of your procedures and things like that. We're just taking that paper roster and putting it on an iPad.
Oh, no, I
you
understand. I
know-
just
you
think
know-
when you blow it up, it
Right,
looks different
right.
than when, and
Yep. And so I think the other big thing is just during training and stuff like that, we've now started a whole implementation team that comes in and basically helps you guys with these kinds of things and really talks about training, because training, to your point, is the most important thing. What procedures are we going to train them on? And we need to train them on that specifically. So that's definitely something. And I appreciate that you brought it up.
for the next part, just for members of the team, if you have questions that you think will, in the answering, I know you'll have opportunities to talk to them afterwards, but if you have any questions that you think will help the public, I'd open it up for the opportunity to ask them now, if you think there's anything else that should be said today here in this public forum.
Many of the team members, by the way, were in Dauphin County Monday, as well as previously, there was a presentation at the wharf. So I just, as background, before I came here, I had 15 years experience in election administration, 7 of those with the introductions of different poll books and comparisons with my colleagues, and then modifications as we went through subsequent elections. I also had the chance to talk with other colleagues in other jurisdictions, large and small, leaning Republican, leaning Democratic. And the most consistent positive experiences I've received about any product, whether it's here in Pennsylvania, as well as Indiana and Illinois, have involved, this brand of poll pad. And I just want to, whether it's this vendor or somebody else, if you believe in the importance of accuracy and transparency, electronic poll books actually assure more accurate and precise check-ins for the reasons I mentioned earlier. And most critically, more up-to-date records. So if with this current paper poll book system, we have to begin printing out the poll books a week before election day. And that may be before we've finished the last minute deluge flood of voter registration forms. So the minute we hit the button to request the files from the Department of State, and the minute we start printing those, they're already outdated, and outdated by a week. They're not going to reflect the latest and greatest data on return ballots additionally. Whereas with this technology, we could update this as late as the Saturday before, the Monday before election, or if we ever get to the point of the state, the Commonwealth off allowing for full connectivity, even a morning update to reflect whatever Siobhan and her team received Monday night in the mail. Additionally, the transparency is so much better because we will have, right now with the paper poll books, and Crystal and Michelle as my witness, we're not going to have any voter history recorded until in a November election, until early middle of December, because they have to go book by book for 428 precincts, which means well in excess of 500 books, and look for where there's a signature and scan a little barcode one at a time. And that process takes weeks, meaning we've already certified the elections before we have the voter history. With these systems, you're talking about having the voter history as early as the Friday after election day, before you begin to even consider any provisional ballots, before you even begin to, and you can make that available. In fact, this technology has the ability to print out the voter history in real time at the precinct, at the close of polls, or even midday, if someone were to request it and we were to allow it, so that you could have a list of a printout of who all has been checked in. lastly, it was mentioned before, the voter ID component, I think, is coming to Pennsylvania. I think it's a matter of when, not if. And I think this is an important, has strong potential to simplify check-in and increase accuracy.
Brown, would you present just briefly though to your proposal for a pilot, just so that's on the table?
Yeah, so they wanted to offer us the ability to do 4 or 5 precincts, but I'm greedy. And so we're going to do 3 locations. I'm looking at a site in Upper Darby that has 4 precincts, where all of the check-ins could happen at one place, and then the voters can be directed to those other stations. There's another location in Middletown where we have 1 precinct in one building, and across the parking lot, 2 precincts in another building. And I think that would provide a great test. They would not be interconnected between the 2, but again, you would have the value of the entire voter registration file from the entire county, so that if someone arrived in the wrong room, they could be redirected to, you want to go to table 2 over in the adjacent building. And thirdly, another location in Brookhaven, where we have different precincts in different rooms in that building. Again, there would not be interconnectivity between those, but it would be a great test. And I think we get a variety in those 11 precincts of different skill sets for judges of election, clerks, machine operators, what have you.
So the proposal will be to hand select a small number of precincts where we might have valuable lessons learned and have them use the electronic poll book capabilities during the primary. And as I understand it, there would be available if we needed it, the backup poll books themselves to.
Yes, you're always going to have the paper poll books as a backup in every jurisdiction that I'm aware of.
2 just
Follow-up
follow-up
question, go
questions. So on the signature pad, one thing I've observed, I'm sure everyone has observed, is that our signatures tend to look different just because of the differing nature of the surface of paper versus the surface of any screen. And I guess I'm less worried about it happening on election day with the poll workers there, as I am, a post facto review. And people are looking at these things and say, well, that's not George Washington's signature. That's just 3 curlicues. And that might, and so I'm sure that's a situation that maybe people have used to cast doubt on the process before, even though and I know when people sign, they're just writing the squiggles. So I think we should just carefully consider that as we move forward. The other thing is, you mentioned the training materials that could be loaded onto the pad. Just knowing how computer users vary in skill, let's say, and the situation where you came out of the app and into, right, it might be beneficial for us to think about having a training materials pad that's separate from the check-in pad at every polling station, that's sort of like dedicated. This blue pad, this is what you go to for all your resources. This
Yep.
green one is where we check people in.
Sure.
Just an idea to keep it simple for the
Yeah.
poll workers.
All right, so we're going to move to public comment. We don't normally do public comment as a Q&A. I'm going to allow that with respect to all of us, that we honor sort of what the intention is, which is to get useful information or to make a public comment, as everybody is allowed to do under our Sunshine Act. So with that, I see you had your hand up first. That's why. So public comment can be used both for comment and for questions, and respectfully.
Need to move the mic back over there?
Yes,
Okay.
Yeah,
please.
you may just need to respond loudly if it is a question for you.
Or we have another.
Oh, do we have an active mic?
Peter.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Next to John.
There's one on the other side of Jim too, if it's helpful. Okay, and please, just as normally you would with public comment, please say your name and your address.
Okay, do we have the clock running? or
It's
how are
not
we
on
doing?
though. I'm going to give a little leeway if it's
Oh, okay,
questions to the
all right.
answers, but
Is this on?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay, all right, here we go. This will be fun. Right. Paris Coker, 836 Concord Road, Glen Mills. I have a mountain of questions and concerns. First of all, I want to note that the previous meeting of the Board of Elections was not duly notified to the public. And I hope that does not happen again in the future, and I very much regret the neglect of so doing. And I also am concerned about the timing of today's meeting being on a Wednesday morning between the agenda meeting of the county council yesterday and the regular meeting this evening. And I think that was at best very inconsiderate on the part of however that timing was made. Whether it's intentional or not to make it difficult, I don't know, but I hope that that will be taken into consideration at
How
future
was the meeting
scheduling.
Not noticed last month. I'm just, what, in terms of what type of public notice?
The meeting was held on January 24th and the notice was published on January 23rd, which was only 1 day notice rather than the 3-day legal notice required.
24 hours notice under the sunshine law.
Only 24-hour notice? My understanding is the law is 3 days. All right, if I'm
Well,
mistaken.
either way, let's take that under review. I appreciate you bringing that to our
Okay.
attention. We don't intend to have notifications that don't meet the standards, so thank you.
Okay,
But in terms of the regularly scheduled meeting, this is, I believe, other than having to be bumped because of conflicts with the room, is essentially this regularly scheduled meeting from the beginning of the year. We announced that it's going to be the last Tuesday. It has
fourth
to be moved
Tuesday.
To Wednesday, right?
all right, I'm sorry, I missed that.
Yeah,
I apologize.
Thank you.
All right, single day voting, the stretching out of voting concerns me very much. And single day voting is the best way to ensure the accuracy and the fairness of the election overall. Less electronics, not more, for the simple reason that electronics are much more easily manipulated than the actual paper ballots. I have a question regarding whether this system is interfaced with. There was some discussion by Mr. Allen of a redesign of the Sure Vote system to Sure Vote or Total Vote. How does that work, interface with this system? Is it a replacement? Is it to work with the system or what?
Why don't we address that at the end so she can continue her
Okay.
public comment, because that's a bigger topic.
Okay. This would certainly eliminate the concerns as expressed by Mr. Eric Specken in his observations of the recount in Haverford concerning the paper of various shades and so forth, which questions the source as all the printing is to be done at a single location. The use of this system in Georgia, St. Louis, Cook County, and New York City does not come from me at all. Those are not known to be bastions of integrity in government or in elections. And we need to keep the election precincts and the doings local, so where people are known by their neighbors. I do not like the idea of being able to register on the same day of the election, to go anywhere to vote. I think both of those, any of those ideas are detrimental to the integrity of our voting system.
If you have one more comment, I'll allow it because we did talk.
Thank you. I'm also concerned about the part that the flagship building played in the November 8th, 2022 election. There was no note that that was to have any part in the proceedings that I'm aware of prior to observing and folks noting, and I personally drove by the building and saw the police protection, heavy police protection of the flagship building on election night. And then there was a long delay between the arrival of the materials from the judges of elections to their arrival at the wharf. And it's understood generally, whether or not this has been acknowledged by the Board of Elections, I'm unaware, that there was a layover, so to speak, at the flagship building. And I would like some accounting from the Board of Election on those matters.
Okay.
And the changes in the county administrative code regarding the return board are egregious. The state law requires there to be a report issued by the return board. And the report this year was not issued by the return board, but one which had been prepared according to what I was told when I arrived at the warehouse on Friday morning, was that the report had been prepared by Mr. Allen and Jackie Dunn. They're not the return board. They're not responsible to prepare that report. And then later it was said that there would be no return board.
See, I do have to stop, and I do want to have
Thank you.
Mr. Allen respond to, if you'd like, to both things, but the two things that I'm interested in hearing, everybody hearing your answer to, is just making sure it's clear, the vendor's involvement in the Sure migration versus what we're talking about here. And also if you want to talk about the paper issue.
First off, the Sure system was created after the Help America Vote Act was passed in 2003. And the Sure Vote initially, or Sure system, the statewide uniform registry of electors, was in use by a combination of states. Now, over time, it became so archaic and it was replaced by other states. And Pennsylvania is the only only state that still uses the Sure system. And simply put, the old Sure system is a hot plate trying to do the job of a microwave. And it's been modified and additional programs have been layered on, and it exceeds its original functionality, and it has a hard time keeping up with important tasks such as those related to not only Act 77 but voter registration and updating of voter history files and all kinds of other functions. So the Sure Vote system, which is to replace it, was originally being performed by a company named BPro, which has since been absorbed and acquired by No Inc., and a wing of it is Total Vote. So that's a whole voter registration database redesign so that it's more functional, more easy to use, more nimble, better at being able to produce the reports that both the public wants and that we need, not only for voter registration, but for voter registration maintenance. So able to be able to get rid of outdated records, for example.
And that's a project at the state level, right? And it's been in the works, I think, through spanning governors of both parties and over maybe even over a decade. So, but we're near the end of that migration, and we're going to be experiencing that change, and it will really affect our back office work, I think, the most.
I want to address a couple of the other concerns that were raised. The so-called expert who was there never asked this question about various shades and there are the ballots that are printed, the vote by mail ballots that are printed by Fort Orange Press and previously other vendors that are on 4 color presses. The ballots that are printed in our voter service center, absentee and vote by mail, whether they're replacement or whether they come in person to apply, are printed on the touch writer, which only has black ink. That's it. And I don't understand why this person didn't raise the question, but y'all have my email. I've responded to your emails. You could have asked this question, but if you want to make it a thing now, go ahead. I don't understand why there's a desire to shoot first, ask questions later, but I'm answering the question. There's always been 2 different sets of ballots. The ones that are produced in-house are black and white, and the ones that are produced by the vendor are full 4-color with the blue and gold county seal. So that's the difference there.
Thank you.
Next, on same-day registration and vote centers, we're not talking about advocating that. The vendor was simply mentioning that if and when this state or any other state adapts that, there's not going to be an added cost for additional programming. One of the ways that some poll book vendors get you for more money is that they sell you on what you need initially, and then anytime there's a change, they say, oh, well, that's a programming change, and that's going to be an additional $50,000. And so I think what the vendor was just trying to reflect that if and when laws change here or anywhere else, they already have those components built into the system. So I want to assure you, we're not advocating for vote centers or same-day registration. Next, in the flagship building, I began referencing that before the county council and this board of elections in August and September. And I noted how that we were going to have to change under Act 88 and the Election Integrity Grant program, how we were going to have to change gathering the Dropbox materials at one central location and not get those under the old system. It took until 3 a.m. We had to send out vans to 41 drop boxes, retrieve them, get them back to the wharf, And under Act 88, we had to have a count of those, of the envelopes by midnight. So we had to change it. I mentioned it in meetings as early as August before the county council when we were getting approval for the election integrity grant. I said, this is one of the things that's going to have to change. We're going to have a centralized location. Did I know at that point that it was going to be the flagship building? No, but that's indeed what we did. As a result, we had the materials at the wharf sooner than ever before, not later than ever before. We had to have a count of those ballots, and we did have a count of those ballots, the envelopes, by midnight. And it had no impact on the receipt of the precinct materials, which, just like in the primary of 2022, happened entirely at the government center, not the flagship building. None of the materials passed through the flagship building from the precincts. They came here, they were loaded onto a truck here, they went directly to the wharf from here on the same time frame as normal. Lastly, on your questions about the county code, if the state law requires a report, we will have to produce a report. It does not require a report, but if state law exceeds county code, we don't get to ignore state law just because the county code changes. Additionally, there was a report that was given. Perhaps it was not to your satisfaction, but it was a verbal report at the certification meeting. Mr. McBlain asked questions of the person from the return board who gave the report. It's on videotape and it's on our website. With that,
Thank you. No, I don't think that requires a response. Yeah. Thank you. Please.
My name is Charlotte Hummel, and I live in Lansdowne, Pennsylvania, and I'm a proud member of the reality-based community. I would be remiss if I did not pitch having Lansdowne be one of those test communities. We have a site that has 5 precincts, 2 in one small gym and 3 in another, and we would be a perfect test site for that system. And I'm glad to see that hopefully coming, because like the ballots that are scanned through any machine in a particular site, regardless of the number of precincts, this also will streamline the process of checking in to any place in the precinct or the site, regardless of the precinct. So I think our judges of election are going to love that. In terms of the small pieces of paper, I could only make 2 suggestions. When it's collected by the ballot person who hands out the ballot, either put it in a little lockbox, let's talk about that again, or on one of those little spikes that they used to have on the desks where you put your invoices for bills. So thank you very much.
Thank you. All right.
we will keep Lansdowne in mind if we need a backup.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Ms. Schwartz.
Good morning.
morning.
Thank you for the presentation. It was very informative. I have some questions and also some comments. First, concerning the return board report, since that was the last topic that Mr. Allen just discussed. The return board report is supposed to be signed by members of the return board according to statute. So that's not an oral report. It's to be a written report. It's to be available for the public. And we've been denied this report now for 2 election cycles. I'd like to know why. That's my first comment. My second comment is I would like to get away from the F word. I haven't mentioned fraud here. I would like to talk about processes and procedures. And I know from my own observations, direct observations, that processes and procedures were not followed in some ways before and after the November 2022 election. And so I'm concerned by adding a new procedure, a new process to the whole mix that we have here in this county in elections is going to further complicate our situation. Dr. Patricia Bleasdale reported recently in a Board of Elections meeting, she lives in Glen Mills, that she was a poll watcher at a Chester voting location where there were several precincts, and that the scanner in one particular precinct broke down and was not fixed for 3 hours. So to add more devices to to our voting processes and our precincts, where, as Mr. Albert stated previously, you have people with varying skills with technology, especially senior citizens that might not be accustomed to working with these machines, that does not make for a smoother election. I'm concerned also about the connectivity of the cellular iPads. We're basically using a program that's on a cellular iPad that is capable of connectivity. Why is this machine that we are using in elections capable of being connected to the internet, even if it's being shut down for the election? The capability is still there. The vulnerability is still there. My big question is, how much does it cost? Because I'm going to tell you, no matter what it costs, this county cannot afford to add electronic poll pads in an election process that has gone from under $1 million a year to $4 million a year, and the bureaucracy of elections in this county is growing. So now we're talking about adding more machines to the mix. And not only that, but the COVID money has dried up. A lot of the grant money was there for one time. This is going to be on the backs of our taxpayers, and it's going to be reflected in our taxes. Let's,
At time, Ms. Schwartz.
I believe some grace.
That's because we answered a question in the middle of her 3 minutes.
Okay, how much does it cost then?
Okay, thank you. Okay, sir.
Thank you. The delay, I actually have to get going to work. My name's David Cleary, 72 Schoolhouse Lane in Concord. Real quickly, because I got 3 minutes limited. Yeah, I was a random volunteer, majority inspector last election, was impressed by the training, was impressed by the integrity of the process. All of the stuff I heard on the news, I found something different, and I was surprised I have to put in TurboTax how much I got paid to do it. I thought I was doing it for free when I signed up.
Thank you
Good.
for your service.
Yeah, it was definitely, where I'm here today is one of the most critical things is our local election, our community, our school board, and it's real arduous for regular citizens to get on the ballot, and the cross-filing requirements and the way the ballot set up disadvantages the folks. I'll make 2 points. Something switched 2 years ago, and so if you cross-file for school board, now if you get on both ballots, you're listed once as a Democrat, Republican. And I'm wondering where the law is that permits 2 different flavors of writing a ballot. And secondly, the piece of paper I handed the man, there's 3 copies of it. For some reason, the state election code for cross-filing allows an individual running for office to collect signatures no matter what his party registration. But if you're running for school board, you can only collect signatures when you cross-file if you're registered with that party. And there seems to be an adamant understanding in the public space that that makes sense and that's fair. Whether the law is that way or not, I still am not hearing anybody in the legal community say they just missed the mark. And one thing I want to comment on, and I believe, I don't remember your name, sir, but I've worked with you in the past in the Bureau of Elections, and I found you very fair. And I'm hearing what you're saying about your email. I'll take advantage of that. I don't mean to show up at the meeting and throw stuff out if you'll answer, but it was said at the last meeting, if you're running for office, you need to go hire a lawyer. I really, as a citizen and possibly as a veteran, I believe our system of government, any citizen should be able to set up and have a reasonable, legitimate opportunity to fairly get on the ballot. And if you have to go hire a lawyer to fight off nefarious claims because people don't want you on the ballot, and truth be told, I got a reputation for asking tough questions that high-level public officials haven't appreciated in the past. That shouldn't make it harder for those kind of individuals to get in there. That's what we need in our government. We need independent individuals that aren't burdened by having a party sponsorship specifically. We need options on the primary ballots, not just those specifically chosen by a party for school board elections. We're not even getting options in the primary elections oftentimes for school board, much less in the general election. In my opinion, time's up is that we can do better to make it more accessible
Do you have a minute or two more just to listen to some? I do want to have some comments. First of all, I don't remember that comment, and that is disappointing. I happen to be a lawyer, and I don't think you should need a lawyer to run for office. I do know
It's
that
on the
we.
video. I watched the video.
No, I
I
think you
can
did have it. I
explain-
just don't remember it because I feel like that would have been the comment that would
It
have
deserves
struck
more
me.
context.
It was, oh, okay. But we do, at least
Appreciate
as a team, I'm just, yeah, I just want to give you some feedback. We do as a team try to make allowances for people who are filing as individuals. For example, in the campaign finance reports, we do find sometimes that individuals make mistakes. And so we have a practice of waiving fees at times when that happens because it's it's a mistake that's not made intentionally. So things like that. But I do think we've become a more litigious society than we should be. And I say that even though that's how I make a living. But I do think the order and the single listing issue came up a long time ago, Mr. Allen, and I was hoping that you could respond and just provide some feedback on that to start.
Sure, a couple of things. I did mention that the only consistent advice we can give, legal advice
Oh,
that we can give
gotcha.
to individuals running for office, if they get into the weeds on a certain question, we can't really advise people how to, prepare their petition. Is, the one consistent piece of advice we can give is it's advisable, especially with campaign finance laws, to consult with an attorney who's versed in the election code.
That makes sense to me. We can't give legal advice.
But
You
we
understand that,
do,
right?
but we do, and Lorene Hagan and her staff, and we even try to refine it this time, give as detailed of instructions as we can to accompany that petition that we place on it. So it literally has numbered steps that correspond to the numbered blanks on the petition form. Additionally, we can answer basic questions down at the Bureau, but if somebody says, well, can I have someone from out of state circulate the petition if they might be registered with a different party? Now we're getting into the weeds of what could be an objection in a case, and we don't want to be giving bad advice on what a Court of Common Pleas judge may rule otherwise. So that was, I hope that provides some context for what I said.
One of the other counties, I have a sample here, I can send it to you, actually puts in their same information package that it was ruled that you can be from out of state. You just have to be with that political party,
Right.
which the candidate can't go get their own signatures unless you can't crossfall. You got to be registered with one party.
Mhm.
And it really impedes at the low level school board thing, but somehow the law was adjusted so that it was legal for the judges who are going to judge.
Right. And I just, we'll give a little bit more on that in a second.
On
I
the-
do,
on
we're not the legislature, so you can't blame us for the laws. We carry them out, but I do want Mr. Allen to provide some additional feedback.
On the cross-filing issue, if someone cross-files as both a Democrat and a Republican candidate, they will appear on the Democratic ballot only with no party designation. It's just the Democratic ballot. And then it will also appear on the Republican ballot. Then in the fall general election, because of the technology that's now used, it used to be the person was listed twice on that old Danaher equipment. And then whichever switch you flipped, it prevented you from, voting for that person again. But in this, with the paper ballot, so that we have a paper indelible record of every ballot cast, if you had the person listed twice, and let's say it's a vote for 3 office, someone might be tempted to vote first for the person as a Democrat, then for the person as a Republican. Again, this is on the fall ballot. So that's when they're listed Dem Rep. Or if the Republican were to be governor, it would be Rep Dem, and they would be listed at the top for that contest.
It's a technology thing is in somewhat what you're saying. The disappointing thing is it's very well defined. It supposedly as running for school board, you can't go get signatures, but it's kind of loose on how the ballot's written. That's the frustration as a citizen.
I
And
appreciate your comment. I'm gonna have to stop, but is there any other feedback on that? All right, then, but thank you. And I hope,
And I
and
think it
do
was
email
better.
Mr. Allen and respectfully, right? And I
Oh,
think he's been
absolutely.
he's been
All
very,
my public comments are respectful.
They
I
are.
can say that I have maybe not been so.
I didn't
treated.
have that experience with you. This was very helpful. I think it was a good point about, we hadn't mentioned again the school board, but as we come up for school board elections, it's important to remind people why that listing happens the way it is. So I really do appreciate your comments and thank you for your time.
Yep.
Is there any other public comment?
Thank you.
All right. Well, with that, then, Mr. Allen, you're back on the floor.
Thank you.
And
Quickly,
thank you very much for your presentation. We appreciate it.
on the status of mailings of the annual applications, we completed that mailing by the deadline on February 6th. We have approximately 17,000 applications that have been received. And as of Tuesday morning, we may have more now. We had more than 4,000 processed. I'm seeing Lorraine nod. We're over 5,000 of those processed. The candidate petition circulation of filings ends. I want to remind all candidates out there, whether they're for school board director or township or borough council, what have you, or MDJ, that ends on March 7th at close of business at the Bureau here in media at the Government Center. We received a number of questions on the need to notarize the candidate's affidavit. We also received questions on circulators being of the same party. This is true, except for those circulating petitions for a candidate for court of the common pleas. That's the only exception. But as far as having to notarize the candidate's affidavit, we checked with the Department of State back in January, an order that came out related to COVID, allowing voters to fill out an affidavit, or rather the candidate to fill out an affidavit in lieu of the notarization. It was an order issued by the Secretary of State, and we were told that the order has not been rescinded and therefore is still in effect. Next, on polling places, we have on there that Eddystone North and South, do we have a recommendation yet, or is that just on the radar screen?
Okay, we'll need to tee that up, I think, at the next meeting then for action. We haven't listed that as an action item, so I think we have to.
I apologize. Also, just so the board knows, there's a request that we combine Tinicum 1 and 4 at the firehouse there. The warehouse will be examining that option. Also, we're going to have an impact of the county holiday going away. So at the Human Services site in Upper Darby and at two magisterial district courts where we had precincts in the past, we're going to have to find new locations for those as well. So I'm not a big fan of that concept of getting rid of the county holiday, but there we are. And it will still be a county holiday in November, but it is going to cause a few wrinkles here and in terms of staffing needs elsewhere on election day. And
Are
that's
there
all I
other logistical administrative burdens that places upon our operations?
Yes, just to give a few examples, we rely on the sheriff's department to make emergency deliveries. We rely on the print center to be able to print emergency replacement supplies of ballots if need be. We rely on the park police to provide security. So if it is not going to be a county holiday, we're working with human resources to try to see if people opt to take their personal day on election day, whether they can qualify for an additional stipend, because it used to be all of these individuals would work with us, earn overtime, and now we're going to be asking them to possibly work at the end of a day where they've already put in a full day's work at the government center, the courthouse, or some other facility. So that is a administrative burden.
Thank you.
I think if it makes sense for our solicitor's report to go at the end, because I do believe we have need for an executive session on a privileged conversation. So if you would, Mr. Allen, please continue with the agenda.
Dropbox status, Bethel Township informed us that through our attorneys that they have voted to have the Dropbox there removed. So we're going to work with Bethel Township to have that removed. Meantime, we're going to work with a private entity for the possible placement of a Dropbox in Upper Chichester. In terms of the next item, status of the remaps of wards in Upper Providence and Rander, there's no news to report. Neither one is going to be remapped in terms of election administration purposes until after the primary election. And the next item, the status report on the remap of the magisterial district judge districts. I just have,
I'm sorry, Mr. Allen. I
I'm
think-
sorry, before we go on to the next one, I just wanted to ask a question. We had a lot of conversation at last month's meeting regarding Radnor.
Yeah.
And I know Upper Providence apparently is tied up in court or it hasn't come to our attention as of yet. But when we left it with the Radnor precinct, again, it seemed to be that the simple answer was that apparently that the township, when they did it, couldn't do anything with that micro precinct, but that the potential was that this board could.
Correct.
And it was the easy answer was to move it, from just that micro precinct into I think it was the second ward that was there. And what process do we go through in order to evaluate whether that is appropriate to do, or how does that move forward? I know we don't have time for the
No, and
primary
I do think, I do not know whether or not we're going to have at some point a solicitor's memo on some of the options legally, but assuming that this is not privileged and it's just factually based, we.
no,
Mr.
very, very briefly.
Allen, He has collected some additional information, I think.
So the board solicitor has been in touch with Radnor Township Solicitor to express our concerns about the notion of creating a precinct that might have as few as 30 voters. That's on its face unfair to so many other communities who have that we're going to be, urging them to combine two precincts of, say, 350 and 500 voters. And the idea of creating a micro precinct for 30 college students who may or may not register to vote here in Delaware County is problematic. So that's been communicated. It was well received and understood as it was relayed to me by our solicitor. And so I think there's an understanding there.
So is the thought process that Radnor Township would have to amend their plan and send it back to us, or?
Well, Radnor Township really has no legal authority to create precincts.
Okay,
So they have the legal authority to create their commissioner wards.
Right.
Which they've done. If they want to, they can revisit that meat cleaver shaped edge of I believe it was the third ward, and decide whether they want to move that into the second ward. We have no, bearing over that. Or the court, when it's hearing the redistricting, might weigh in on that. But we don't have any say in that matter. But we do have say on the precinct matter. And so they've recommended a series of precincts to us, but I think we've conveyed to them the difficulties with that one tiny pocket of the third ward, and the idea of creating not even a micro of a micro precinct.
And I think, Mr. Solicitor, you've been focused on a different issue recently, but I think we're probably getting close to time to have the options understood. I think Radnor felt compelled to create that micro precinct based on the census anomaly that was reported. So I do think we should understand the legal issues around what we might be able to do, if you wouldn't mind preparing a report for that.
Yes, we absolutely can. I would just add also on that micro precinct issue that the code does require the precincts to be roughly equal in population. So facially, that doesn't look like it's going to be permissible, but we can certainly look into it further and have a discussion.
right, that's what I mean. I think everybody was sort of, because of the anomaly with the census tract, the obvious answer was to just move that small micro precinct into the next ward up. I'm just asking who does that?
Right.
Who makes the changes on the map?
How would it be done if it was to be?
How would it be done?
Thank you.
Next, the revamp of the magisterial district judges. Really, all I have to do is praise staff, the best staff, election staff in the United States. The Bureau and Voter Registration and our IT staff member verified each other's work in preparing for moving the voters to the new MDJ districts. Keep in mind, this was something that came down only in the beginning of February, right before the petition circulation period began. So we had to move very quickly and efficiently to try to move all the voters into the right MDJ districts. And at the same time, and that also helps us prepare for preparing the ballot database for the May primary. So the MDJ districts, harder to say than it looks, has been completed timely. And that's all I have. And then we have, next up is campaign finance.
Do we have any waiver requests this time to review?
Morning.
Good morning.
Lisa Jackson, Campaign Finance Supervisor. So we received 3 waiver requests since our last meeting. We have the name of the committee is Yaden Democratic Committee. They currently have overdue fees in the amount of $1,500.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch which Democrat.
Yaden Democratic Committee, and we do have a spokesperson here that wants to speak to you for their issue. We have also Friends of Paula Brown. Her current fees are $500. And we also have Qualified Judges of Delaware County, and their fees are currently $80.
And what is their history? Do we want to break them down or how do you want to handle that?
Yes, so for Yaden Democratic Committee, they had a change of treasurer, and it was over, I would say, over a little over a year ago. The treasurer was never registered with our department, and therefore the reports were never considered accepted. And then some of those reports were filed late. So they finally registered the correct treasurer and they got the reports up to date, but they still owed back fees. And those back fees were for, I believe, 5 reporting cycles. And
do you
those
have a
cycles were
recommendation?
$250 each.
Do you have a recommendation?
Yes, I would recommend, that they could be possibly waived due to the fact that the new treasurer didn't know that to be registered first and report timely. I believe their last treasurer resigned abruptly.
And you said someone's here to speak on that at the end here, or is that, what were you saying about the spokesperson?
There's Ms. Hummel is here.
Okay,
She
okay.
would like to
We'll get to
speak.
you
She
then.
would like to address you.
All right, let's move to the next one.
Sure. The next one is Friends of Paula Brown. So Ms. Brown did owe previous back fines. She owes for cycle 7 and cycle 5, which amount to $500. She is a known political person, and she's paid several fines, but she didn't know that her fines were still due for her personal committee, and her treasurer is not reporting properly. So, and she's aware of that. So she reported, and she would like to have her fees waived and also terminate her committee.
And do you have a recommendation on that one?
Yes, I would recommend to waive hers if it's possible.
Okay.
Right. And the other one is Qualified Judges of Delaware County. Their treasurer is Carol Miller, and she just said that she thought that account was closed previously, but it was not. I think she prepared a report, but she never mailed it in. And I would also recommend that hers be waived because she would also like to terminate that committee.
Does anybody have any questions? No, then Ms. Hummel, would you like to speak about Yaden? Thank you, thank you.
I believe you got the waiver request that I prepared. It's 2 pages long and incredibly boring, but you're welcome to read that. This came to my attention on February, I guess it was, no, January 26th. I learned that Yaden, and many of you know the Democratic Party of Yaden, that there's a lot of controversy there. There's a lot of changeover there every 2 years. Their treasurer, who was Melvin Holmes, failed to file as the treasurer when he was appointed back in 2021. But he filed reports throughout the year. They were not counted because he wasn't the treasurer of record. Then for some reason, and I don't know why, 2022, he stopped filing reports. And when the treasurer changed over in August, because there was controversy about who was an elected Democratic committee person, who was not, so that couldn't be done until August, the new treasurer, there was no treasurer appointed. So then they were notified by the county that they had no reports, they were delinquent 2 years, they needed a new treasurer, or they needed an old treasurer. Within 5 days, we took care of this problem. We registered the old treasurer, we the reports were filed as timely because they actually were sent in on a timely basis. We filed a year's worth of the new reports based on bank statements, and a new treasurer was appointed for that period of time. So there was nothing nefarious here. There was no intent to deceive. We're talking about a total amount of money that was about, I don't know, $3,000 in and out of the bank account over 2 years. We're not talking about tremendous amounts of money. And as we see from the report, there are a number of people who forget to do these for whatever reason. So I'm here pro bono. I'm speaking on behalf of the Democratic Committee, but because these are personal obligations to the treasurer, I'm also representing Melvin Holmes, the former treasurer, and Sharon Harris Council, who stepped in to be the treasurer for the last two cycles of last year. So anything you can do, I would appreciate for them.
I myself, I appreciate the additional history, because it is always important to make sure that we don't have present to the public as if people who are not trying and deliberately avoiding paying fees are allowed to get away with it. But what you've described, and I think it was reinforced by our own teammate here, Ms. Jackson, that I'm inclined to vote for a waiver on all three. I don't know if we would like to have any discussion if we're ready to do that. And Mr. Alberts appears
One
to have a
point of
question.
clarification, Charlotte, hello. You represented that you're representing both the current and former treasurer of Yaden, and
Yes.
they're in agreement in their characterization.
Yeah,
of the
because we all
situation?
worked together to make this happen. I got in touch
Okay.
with Mr. Holmes, and we worked over the phone to get his reports done, and
Got
then
it.
the new treasurer. I want to make
I just
two
know
other,
sometimes there are disagreements, and I just want to make sure that this was,
right.
so you're representing both the former and
There's
current.
no conflict.
Yeah,
They perceive
right.
no conflict.
No,
I
there's no
assume.
conflict. They're all in the same place. I want to make two comments, though, in closing. One is that I'm currently the solicitor for Delaware County Democrats, and because of this great work that I've had to do, I am insisting on ongoing training for treasurers so that they know they have to register, that they know they have to report, and to stay on top of that with our own county treasurer helping with the technicalities. I'd also like to say that while I did not get any legal advice from the Election Bureau, I was treated with courtesy, with respect, was given the information that I needed, and I credit Lisa Jackson and the staff there with all the help that they gave me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. McLean, any? Okay. That's my inclination. If I'll hold a vote if you're ready to vote. Do we have a motion though to waive the three fees, or do you want to break them up? How do you want to handle?
I would make a motion to approve the three waiver requests as presented.
I would second that motion.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
None opposed. That motion passes. Thank you. Mr. Allen, the next meeting date?
Next meeting date will be fourth Tuesday, in March, which will be the 28th. It will not be, as was this meeting, conflict with town council. So I regret there was a conflict. We normally are on the fourth Tuesday without fail. Yesterday was an exception because February is the only day. So they had their meeting being the 28th, followed by the March 1st. So that will not be at play at the beginning of April. So we will meet as regularly scheduled, the normal bat channel in that time at 9 a.m. on March 20th.
Thank you. So we're going to go into executive session. I think that Mr. Allen, that completes otherwise the agenda.
Yes.
Okay. As those who were at the meeting, I think it was a couple meetings ago, there was a request to consider whether or not to file a motion for attorney's fees in the 2022 election matters brought against this board. And so for that, we're going to go into an executive session to discuss a privilege recommendation made by our solicitor, but we will not be voting on that issue today. This will just be an executive session, after which we'll come back together to adjourn the meeting. After this, so I have a heads up if people want to know how to schedule their time. Is there going to be any, I see Ms. Winterbaum went to the meeting that she has with the other team. Are we going to have a short presentation on voter registration commission, or are we going to?
Ms. Winterbottom was able to provide me with the notes so that so I'll provide that.
Okay. It's very brief. Okay. So thank you. So then with that, we're going to adjourn to executive session, but not adjourn the meeting. We'll be back shortly.
Want to do the voter registration?
Could we do, we could stop, we could stay. That's actually a better idea. Thank you, Mr. McLean. Why don't we do this? We're going to temporarily, what is it, the right term? It's not pause, we're going to stay, we're going to recess. Thank you. We're going to recess this meeting, the Board of Elections, so that we can just turn very quickly so that the audience does not have to stay through our executive session. I'll call to order the Delaware County Board of Elections Voter Registration Commission meeting for March 1st, 2023. And with that, call to order, Mr. Allen.
On behalf of Ms. Winterbottom, our manager of voter registration, I just want to report a couple of items. End of January.
Your microphone's off.
Oh, I'm sorry. On behalf of Ms. Winterbottom, our manager of voter registration, I'll report a couple of items quickly. At the end of January, Ms. Winterbottom's staff mailed out 3,032 5-year notices, which are the last stage before voters' registrations are canceled due to a combination of inactivity and an indication that they have moved. We've only had 84 of those returns signed with all information the same. 6 returned that they had moved elsewhere in the county. 17 returned that they'd moved out of the state. 5 came back with indications from the Postal Service that the voter in question was deceased, and 502 were undeliverable. Meantime, we are entering into a pilot program with Swarthmore registrations at dormitories. If this is successful, we'd like to replicate it in the summer months and definitely ahead of the 2024 election to see if we can scrub and detect and scrub any outdated registrations from any of the dormitory facilities, not only at that school, but then if this is successful, expand it out to all of the campuses, whether it's, Haverford or Villanova or Newman, what have you, with any universities or colleges that have residence facilities. That's all.
Any questions? Any public comment on the voter registration report from Mr. Allen? This would be public comment time in general for this, for the voter
For voter
registration commission. I'm sorry, I know you've already announced yourself, but this is a new record, so please re-announce.
836 Concord Road, Glen Mills. My name is Karis Coker. Regarding the meeting of the Voter Registration Commission, my question is regarding the previous code, which stated that the Voter Registration Commission shall be headed by members of County Council, whereas the newly adopted code pertaining to the election process states the Board of Elections shall serve as the Voter Registration Commission. Is this your first meeting as the Voter Registration Commission?
Do you have additional comments? I want to make sure we hear all of your comments first.
No, that's it.
Because I don't want to interrupt you. Okay, that's all. That's all.
That's
You
it.
complete your public comment.
Thank you.
We are, well, I'm gonna work with you. I don't remember. I've reviewed the changes as they are, but so I don't want to speak out of turn. So Mr. Solicitor, please interrupt me. We have been this collective of 3 of us have been duly appointed to both the Board of Elections and the Voters Registration Commission. I don't know whether or not any changes that were proposed have been made effectual, but it's my understanding historically that has essentially almost always been the case, that there's been a dual appointment.
Yeah, I don't have the formal charter in front of me, nor the old version or new version of the county code. But my recollection was either in the charter, I think it might in the charter, or the code was that stated that the members of the Board of Elections shall also serve as the members of the Voter Registration Commission.
And I, as I understand the change, it may have been just to simplify that language as I remember reading it, but Mr.
That's
Solicitor.
correct. That's correct.
Thank you. Any other public comment? All right, with that, we will adjourn the Voter Registration Commission meeting and we will resume the Board of Elections meeting, and we will be in executive session. Thank you very much.